Hello, and welcome back to my podcast, Next Level Strategies. Today, we are going to do a deep dive into the source of our help. One of my favorite movie battle scenes comes from the second movie of The Lord of the Rings, The Battle of Helm's Deep. The people of Rohan, aided by an elven army, are behind the walls of their legendary keep built into the mountainside. They are besieged by an overwhelming number of orcs and trolls, the massive army of the evil wizard Saruman. The good wizard Gandalf was gone on the quest to find the bulk of the Rohan army that was not even aware of the attack on their homeland. Gandalf gave the king instructions that on a certain day, as the sun was cresting the horizon, look to the hills and he would see there with Gandalf would be there with the rest of the army. But until then, the people had to survive. The battle raged through the night. The king thought they might actually make it. That is until the outer wall of the keep was breached and the enemy was pouring in like floodwaters. All hope was lost. But wait, not all hope, for the sun had just crested the horizon. The king looked to the promised hills to see them empty, no one coming to their aid. He looked away distraught, but then glanced back one more time. He sees Gandalf and the cavalry of the Rohan coming over the top of the hill and storming down upon the enemy flanks. They won that battle that day. You think you know a guy after 31 straight days of podcasting marathon, and here I am geeking out on you, talking about wizards and orcs and a very important battle of Middle-earth. Well, King David in the Bible was no stranger to battle and seemingly hopeless situations. And there were witches and wizards in Bible times, and David did kill a giant. Just saying. It was King David in Psalms 121, verse 1 that said, I look to the hills, from whence does my help come? David was looking up to the hills surrounding Jerusalem and recalling the years that he spent hiding in those hills. For him, they represented protection, provision, camaraderie with those who had left all to join his army. I would imagine it was a period of a more simple life. I didn't say easy, but more simple, less responsibility. Yea, but he is king now and was looking back at a time when the issues of life and responsibility were maybe a little more blacker and whiter than they are as a king. I can see a period in his life, this period of his life, as being a closeness with God. And through that intimacy with God, he recognized that his help did not come from the mountains themselves, but from God himself. This word hills in the Hebrew refers to actual hills, go figure, but also mountains or high places. The Strong's Hebrew Dictionary has this specific commentary added to this word, sometimes used figuratively. I just mentioned how David could be looking at the hills in a more literal sense, but I want to invest a moment here and look at 4 figurative meanings for hills and mountains, and then answer the question, from where does my help come? The first figurative meaning I want to look at is that mountains and hilltops often represent authority, strength, governmental rule, and influence. We hear of the mountains of influence in our society and culture. It is an elevated position above the masses. It is an easily defendable position, and occupying the high ground is the militarily superior position to hold. David asks, I look to the hills, to the mountains, to the government. From where does my help come? I am confident that David, even though he was king, knew that his help did not come from the government. After all, the reason he was hiding in those hills was to escape the former king that wanted him dead. He certainly wasn't going to get help from him. How about us? Is the government our source of help? Maybe. I mean, there's some really great programs out there to help us in our time of need. Unemployment checks, law enforcement, a system of justice, health care for many, retirement, salvation for most of the aging population. I'm all about voting, and the government can certainly aid us in our time of need. But that is also a relatively new thing in world history, and really, even now, only a thing in first world countries. Ask any of the millions of people in refugee camps across the globe if their hope is in the government. Or how about those oppressed under the dictator or communist rule? No, I cannot rightly believe that David looked to government rule and authority as to where his help came, and neither should we. The second meaning for hills and high places is religion. Over 100 times in the Old Testament, it refers to high places and the temples and altars that occupied these places. Most often, they are referred to temples of false gods. Throughout history, there has been the organizational structure of religion. And for many people and cultures, even today, it is their source of help. Financial assistance, food, physical care, counseling, offering of sacraments, removal of guilt. Some of the most amazing buildings and art in the world are associated with religious organizations of some kind. Religions throughout history often teach morals and caring and generosity, but great travesties have also been committed in the name of religion. Even in Jesus' day, one of the biggest influences of the Jewish culture was the synagogue, maybe even more so than the government. This was a church structure for the worship of God. But Jesus points out that it was a religious organization that had left God out a long time ago, and yet still existed. There is most certainly a difference between a relationship with God and the organization of religion. David is recorded as being a man after God's own heart, and he developed that relationship out in the field, watching sheep and hiding in the mountains, not in a religious organization. So no, David did not look to the organization of the church or synagogues in their day to where his help came from. The next and third mountain is that of personal achievement. We have all heard of mountaintop experiences as opposed to the valleys of life. Someone from the Dave Ramsey organization, I don't remember what his name is, but everything you want in life is uphill from where you are, implying that to get what you want, you will need to overcome the gravitational pull that keeps you from ascending higher. Or how about Zig Ziglar's famous quote, "I'll see you at the top." Who hasn't seen the motivational poster of a person climbing a mountain as a symbol of success? It doesn't matter if it is health and fitness, career success, or relational bliss. The mountain or hilltop or high place is often used as a metaphor for the possibilities and potential for human achievement. And honestly, I'm all about it. I consume motivational and self-help materials on a regular basis. So many of these concepts are taught in the Bible, which I call the original self-help book. The Bible is filled with wise sayings and universal principles that, if applied, will produce amazing fruit in every area of your life. Take 1 Timothy 4:8, for physical training is of some value. Point being that physical training is of some value. David lived an amazing life and accomplished so much, rising from a lowly shepherd where his father thought so little of him. He didn't even bother including David when the prophet Samuel came to his home, to being an internationally reputed warrior, to being Israel's greatest king and a man after God's own heart. And yet history gives us no indication that David was prideful or in any way considered his own abilities to be the source of his help. The Psalms are filled with evidence that David did not see himself as the answer, but God was. David's son, Solomon, was the wisest king and brought Israel to world-renowned prosperity. He walked in all of these mountaintop figurative meanings at the highest level of humankind. He was a king, meaning he had the governmental rule and authority. He built the historically famous temple in Jerusalem. And he personally wrote over 3,000 proverbs and composed over 1,000 songs. He was able to speak on horticulture and animals, and all the kings of the earth traveled to hear his wisdom and judgments. That is definitely a high bar of personal achievement. And yet in his own book, Ecclesiastes, he calls all of it vanity, meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I think it is very clear that David was not looking to the hills of personal achievement to save him. So we have looked at the mountains of authority, rule, and influence, the mountains of religion, the mountains of human accomplishment. In this psalm, David asks himself, does help come from the government or authority or religious practices or idols or human achievements? Of course, David answers his own question in verse 2. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. And then he goes on to say, he that watches over you neither slumbers nor sleeps. So that brings us to the fourth and final mountain, the mountain of the Lord, Mount Zion. Physically, this is the highest place in Jerusalem and where they worshiped God. This chapter of the 121st Psalm is titled A Song of Ascents and would have been sung as they ascended up to this high ground to worship. It is the location that Abraham offered up his son Isaac as a sacrifice, believing that God would provide a sacrifice in place of Isaac. It is a place that Jacob had the vision of a ladder into heaven with angels ascending and descending before the Lord. And it is in this place that David's son Solomon will build the magnificent temple of the Lord. But David wasn't putting his hope in the physical place, but in the figurative meaning of the place. Neither do you or I worship in the physical place, Mount Zion, but we worship him in our hearts. The word Zion is used over 150 times in the Bible, and only some of those refer to the actual physical location. In Psalms 24:3, David asks, who may ascend the hill of the Lord, or who may stand in his holy place? This was a physical act that they would have gone through, ascending the hill to the temple, but only the high priest could go into the holy place, and that only once a year. But Jesus is our high priest. He is our scapegoat. You see, God provided a scapegoat for Isaac on this hill, foreshadowing the scapegoat that God would provide for us all, and thus opening up our access to God in heaven, even as Jacob saw. It is Jesus that has covered over our sins, and we are now holy and righteous and blameless before God, that we may ascend this hill and have personal, intimate relationship with the maker of heaven and earth. I know I am guilty of looking to my elected officials for answers that they cannot provide. I have been a poster child of a churchgoer doing religious acts, but at times my heart was not in it. I have strived in my human efforts to evolve to higher levels of personal success. When Zechariah 4:6 says, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. My help does not come from the strength or wisdom of man. My hope is not in chariots or horses or tanks or policemen or the economy. My hope is in the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. So when the pressures of life are flooding over your walls like an evil army of orcs and trolls, and all hope seems lost, look to the hill from whence comes your help. Ascend that holy hill into the presence of the Lord. Come boldly into the holy place. Come boldly before the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. I know today's episode was a little bit longer, but breaking it up just seemed to water down the conclusion, so I pushed it through. As always, I thank you again for investing your time with me today. Now go out there and choose to make it a great day.